Hello everybody, Brad the Guitarologist here. In today's video, we're going to open this box. Ooh, a nice wafting smell of ancient cigarette smoke. You gotta love that. The customer did talk to me on the phone and let me know what he had done. He forgot to put the tubes in it, I think he said, when he shipped it. So they were sitting on his desk, he said. And there's another part to this thing as well. See, this thing would have clamped together. You see this clip right here, it would have clipped together with another half. So this is really only half of the thing. Alright, so this is a Silvertone Model 9075. So here's the front of the unit. This is a Silvertone Hi-Fi. We have two different inputs, high and low level. We have a loudness control, a tone control, and an indicator light. Pretty cool with the covering though. It looks nice. This is the thin paperish kind of covering that you would see on a lot of, you know, little record players, things like that would have coverings like this. So the tubes are missing. Looks like we have an Oaktron speaker. That's what 918 is. You can always tell an Oaktron because it has like an oak leaf with a lightning bolt through it. 844, this would be 1958, the 44th week. We do have a schematic over here on the side, which is going to be helpful, I'm sure. We have, of course, the chassis with no tubes. And we'll figure out what kind of tubes this thing is supposed to take and all that stuff momentarily. We can see here that this thing was probably dropped in shipping at some point, either on this trip or on a previous trip. You can see how this transformer is leaning forward, or at least leaning backward, I guess you would say, toward the back of the amplifier. We could easily bend that back. It's not a huge deal. But that's the sort of thing that happens during shipping because transformers have a lot of mass, and if you studied your Newton and paid attention in physics class, you will understand the concept of inertia, and that's why transformers do that. Luckily, this one didn't break loose or anything like that and damage anything else. Looks like we have a pretty decent little cabinet. It's not very thick, but it is all plywood, including the baffle. So that's good. I bet it's going to have a pretty good little tone. Okay, if you're the type of person who likes to convert these old amplifiers like this, you really couldn't do a whole lot better than what we have here. It looks like we have a 6x5 rectifier, 6v6 single-ended output, and 12AU7, and a 12AX7. Now one of these says preamp and one says voltage amp. Very simple circuit, very champ-like, and I have a feeling this little sucker is gonna rock. Of course, we have all of the obsolete how to order parts in the USA stuff. You can't get this kind of stuff from Sears anymore. Wouldn't that be neat if you could? Just call up Sears and say, hey, send me a bunch of 6v6s. That would be pretty awesome. Unfortunately, no, Sears is probably on its last legs unless it can come up with some kind of way to convert all of that retail space into warehouse space and then compete with Amazon, which would be interesting because then they would be kind of going back to their roots, wouldn't they? They'd be going back to the mail order thing. It's interesting that it's come full circle and they had it right to begin with. Let's wrestle up some tubes that we can just use in the servicing, and then we'll kind of go from there. One thing I do notice is that this tube socket right here is very loose. It's actually mounted in a way that is meant to be loose. It's actually isolated, which is a good thing. It's got these isolation grommets here, and they are not rotted or anything, surprisingly. All right, back to scoping out this schematic. One of the things I noticed is that up here we have what's called a low-level input jack, and it comes in and goes into this stage here, and then on to the next stage, and then on through this closed high-level jack, and then on to another stage after the loudness control. So that's interesting to have it a low-level input jack that goes through more stages than a high-level input jack. But the reason they've done this is because this is a Hi-Fi amplifier. That is, this is meant to amplify like a little, record player. And some of the old cartridges would be a low-level cartridge, which would require more gain stages to be heard. And some of them were high output or high level cartridge. So that's why we have those. One of the reasons I'm really high on this thing and I think it's going to sound excellent is because most champ type amplifiers only have one preamp tube and one output tube and one rectifier tube. They don't have two preamp tubes like this usually. Alright, so we're going to need some tubes. We're going to need a 6x5 and a 6v6 and a couple of 12AXs. So let's go tube shopping. This is probably a view you never get to see. All of my crap. Some of the future videos probably laying in here. There's your quick glimpse of those. We'll go tube shopping. This is the laundry room / additional storage room with all of the tubes. And we need 6v6 and 6x5. And that's going to be right here in one of these two boxes. I'll take that back actually. The first box that I pulled off the top right there has a bunch of 6x5. So let's go grab one of those. Okay, so let's geek out on tubes for a second. Here's the 6x5 that I found, and it was in this box. Sheldon Electron tube. Sheldon Electric Company, a division of Allied Electric Products in Irvington, New Jersey. Irvington 11. So that's like the postcode at the time. But look what was actually in it. These actually, talk about tubes I've never heard of. I've never heard of Sheldon, and I've also never heard of this. Fomoco. Interesting. Two tube brands that I've never heard of that were in my own stash. As for the 6v6 we picked, here's a Kinrad. This was made 188-5, that's right down the road. Well, all Kinrads were. Right down the road, well, I say road, the river, in Owensboro, Kentucky. Okay, before we do anything else really, we're going to bring this thing up slowly on a Variac. I've got a couple of JJ preamp tubes in there, 12AX7s, and let's see what it does or doesn't do when we dial it up. We're at 66 volts and we're only drawing 0.12 amps. I don't see any filaments glowing yet. I hear some hum though. I have a jack here and I can hear something already. Alright, there's our full voltage, and we're drawing about 1 amp. And it was kind of jumping around there too a little bit, and it looks like kind of curious. Okay, we've got some scratchy pots there, which we'll take care of. Yeah, sounds very sick. Wow. Okay, I would say there is probably some DC leakage going on all over the place inside this thing right now. You know, the pot's very scratchy. Some of that can be explained away by just dust and debris and dirt. Some of it I think might be actually DC on the pot. The same can be said for the input. I think we've probably got some kind of leakage going on somewhere or something, because my guitar pots are scratching all over the place and they really shouldn't be like that. So something is definitely, you know, something's definitely not right. So I think it's time probably to go ahead and crack this thing open and see what all needs to be replaced. Okay, to get the chassis out, we're going to have to remove both of these knobs. And to do that, I'm going to have to get a little bit creative because they're not wanting to come very easily. The temptation always is to get a screwdriver, you know, or something like that, and kind of, you know, try to work it off or whatever. But these knobs we definitely don't want to break, because I doubt I will find more like them easily. So what I'm going to do instead is find something that I can slip behind it. In this case, I'm going to use some of my desoldering braid, and I'll just slip some of this stuff behind it and see if we can't work it off this way. And you can still crack them like this, but it lets you at least kind of work it back and forth. Still doesn't act like it's going to want to come off of here though. It's almost like somebody glued them. I think that's what happened. Somebody's glued these things in. It's really on there. It's coming now, but this is what you want to do. You want to kind of work it off like this. Just kind of work gently back and forth, and eventually they will come, as long as no one super glued them in. But this is a lot safer for the knob than if you try to get a screwdriver or something and pry it off. You don't want to do that. Okay. Well, no, it's just this thing is just really spread out, so that's why it was so difficult. But that's how you get a knob off if it's being stubborn. There we go. We have a couple of nuts and washers now we need to take off. Okay, now I think we have one more screw on the bottom of this thing. The way this power cord is wired in, it's just wired in with a couple of crimped wire nuts here. So we'll just remove this retainer for the... Wow, look there. I did not expect that. This chassis has a bottom. Another thing I just now noticed is that these speaker leads are... These are just in here like so. You see this a lot from, or well, not a lot, but you see this on some hi-fi TV and TV stuff from this era. Speaker connectors like this, which are interesting, but they can also lose connection fairly easily. So we'll want to make sure that these are nice and tight when we put this back on. Alright, with that out, we can get some slack in the power cable here and just kind of be able to service this thing out on the bench easy enough. But I do need to remove this bottom panel, and we've got these little grommet things. This is not a screw, this is just a little pop out, I don't know what you'd call it, some kind of little tab. They just pop right out. I found one in the cabinet already, so it solves the mystery of where it came from. It's good that it has this bottom in it, because it means it should be well shielded. Well, there's our output transformer tucked away inside. This thing is full of disc capacitors. These are probably good. So something else is responsible for our buzz, and I'm looking squarely at that old electrolytic right there. That's an old electrolytic right there. So we'll yank that out of there. Change this big electrolytic can to some smaller electrolytics, and maybe refire it up and see where we are. That cap can is hot. It's actually physically leaking, and it's bubbling. So that needs to go. Okay, we have the new capacitors installed. Installed a new terminal over here to try to get everything in here, and used an empty terminal on the rectifier tube socket to take up space as well. Dialing it up slowly on the Variac now. Got it up to 161 volts on the first power node. And we have light on the indicator. Well, that's interesting. Why is it doing that? Definitely something up with this socket or one of the components on it. I wonder if that right there is shorted. Huh. Obviously something is not right with that V1 tube. Let's try this again. This time I've clipped out this bypass capacitor right here, which is not integral to the circuit working. Okay, turning this thing on and turning it up at all. I mean, it's dead quiet when it's all the way down. Turn it up at all though, and you get that sort of helicopter sound that's called motorboating. That is a sign, and you'll see there the speaker even physically moving in and out. But that is a sign of an unstable circuit. I can remove the V1 tube and the motorboating stops. Well, that is until I turn that all the way up. So something definitely still isn't right with this thing. So I changed the output tube and still no change on the oscillations. We're still getting those. So I'm looking at the schematic and trying to figure out, you know, what about this circuit may be causing that. Well, for one thing, on the inputs, there's no input resistor at all. So it's just straight into the input. Usually you'll find on most Fender amplifiers, you'll get like a 68K input resistor, or on Valcos, you'll get like a 47K, but it'll be somewhere in that kind of range as an input resistor. It's also called a grid stopping resistor. Neither one of these inputs have one. This one does not have one either going into this stage over here. So the first thing I'm probably going to do is add input resistors or grid stopping resistors here, and another one here. Also, we have a couple of odd feedback regions here. We have one coming off of this plate right here. You can see the signal will come off of this plate and go on through this input and on to the next stage. Also, though, some of the signal can go back through this 470K resistor right here, which is going to cancel with phase canceling some of the signal. So it's kind of a feedback that's going to act to suppress some of this signal that's coming in here. The problem is this could also in effect cause oscillations inadvertently. We're going to get rid of this 470K. There's also another one on a little further down over here. There's 150K coming from here and back. So we're going to get rid of both of these, I think. Yes, in fact, see, you see this capacitor right here. That's actually selecting which frequencies are going to be canceled. So you'll only get really high frequencies passing back through here and back through this 150K resistor to here in order to cancel certain frequencies through phase canceling that will make it through ultimately to here. So we have a couple of different areas of phase canceling feedback. We're going to definitely eliminate this 470K right here to make this a little more of a conventional stage. This one we will leave for the time being, but probably will ultimately remove this one as well. And the reason is I was still getting oscillations even when removing this entire tube. So even with this tube gone, if you turn up the volume all the way, you will still get oscillations with just this circuit. A couple other things I noticed about this amp. One of them is on this last stage right here. This is a signal wire, this green one, running from here. This is running from the last preamp stage to the power amp stage. That wire was really close to this wire before I moved this wire up here out of the way. This is the AC wire, and it was like running right parallel with this a little bit earlier. So moving that out of the way may help some, it may not. Also, another thing I notice is that this wire right here, this is actually, there's actually two wires here. There's a ground wire here, and there's another signal wire here. Well, the signal wire is running right along here, and all of these are 6-volt wires. So it's running parallel to two 6-volt wires for a short distance, and then it kind of curves around and goes underneath another 6-volt wire right here. So what I'm going to do is replace this wire with a shielded cable. Instead of coming over around this way, I'm going to go the shortest distance and come either straight over the top or come out this side right here with a shielded cable. Okay, I've made those changes to the wires. I've moved them around a bit, and we're still getting just out of control oscillation here with the volume all the way up. Touching this tube seems to make it worse. And it goes into another kind of oscillation when you pull the tube. So definitely something not right here. And this is a this is a 12AU7 as well that I've put in this first stage. Plus, when you just turn it on low, it sounds okay, but it's still buzzy and very, very, very flubby, bassy. Interestingly, the tone knob seems to be doing nothing. Okay, I measured the components associated with the tone knob, and none of that seems to be a problem. Not really sure why it's not changing the tone. I haven't investigated that fully, but it doesn't appear to be, at least so far, as if that's going to be the problem. So I'm going to turn my attention to removing those areas of feedback. That's going to include this capacitor here, this resistor. That's on the second stage. I am just going to remove them. This resistor right here is one on the first stage. Now you may be asking yourself, why am I doing this at this stage? Because it seems kind of willy-nilly. It seems kind of shooting in the dark. If we're trying to find the source of an oscillation problem, why am I just not tracing signal? I thought I would address that. We're going to remove that feedback anyway. Before we start tracing signal and all that, we may as well just go ahead and remove that feedback and then see where we are now tonally. And who knows, maybe we'll get lucky and maybe that will be the source of the problem. Actually, it seems a lot brighter. There, now the tone knob's working for sure. See, look at that. You can hear it working now. Oh, that's going to be way, way better. We do still have oscillation because I think we don't have enough grid stopping resistors between stages. I think putting a ground cord on this thing is going to help out a lot. This is still a 2-prong. We also are going to need a fuse. This thing is not fused at the moment. We have 2 capacitors. We have one here, and they are connected to basically each end of this hum adjust pot. And this is also connected to the rest of the filaments. And also connected here to the midpoint of these two, if we follow this up, it goes directly in the path of our signal. But just the fact that this is tied in with the 6-volt winding here, separated by a couple of capacitors, is odd, to say the least. But I think simply removing this network, removing these 2 capacitors, not connecting any of this in with the signal path, which is, I think, seems crazy. Okay, so I did go ahead and remove those capacitors from this circuit, but I left the hum balance pot in the circuit and basically just clipped the wires and twisted them a little more tightly and shortened it slightly. All right, I gave this a short test, and it does sound like we're headed in the right direction. It's definitely improving. The channel that uses only the 2 gain stages from this tube sounds great now. It sounds, basically like a little champ. But when you plug into the other front end, that's when you develop problems. There's so much gain, and unless you leave it real low, on the volume, you're going to end up getting oscillation. Also, it's a little bit on the harsh side, and there's just a lot of bass as well. So the top end is kind of harsh and prickly, and the bass is just kind of flubby and uninspiring. So what we'd like to do is tighten up the bass. Also get rid of some of this excessive overdrive that we have going. And the way we're going to do that is by eliminating one of these stages of gain. So we're going to have one additional stage of gain rather than two additional stages of gain. We may play with some of these capacitor values as well in the couplers, and also may change a couple of these on downstream to a poly type, and maybe even on this first stage as well, to keep that from being as brittle. Alright, eliminating a gain stage is fairly easy. Essentially all we need to do is eliminate the plate voltage supply to the side we're going to eliminate. Pin 6, 7, and 8 will be basically our functional side of this tube. So that's the plate we want to keep. This yellow wire is the plate we want to eliminate. Yeah, so we don't need that. Okay, so that's going to eliminate the voltage going to one side of the 12AX7 to the plate. Alright, so now no voltage will get to that side of the tube. If we were to fire this thing up right now, it would just make probably a really loud hum, and you wouldn't hear anything if you were plugged into this input. We may as well go ahead and remove any other components too that we're not going to be using, such as that resistor right there. That is the plate resistor for the side that we are going to eliminate. So let's go ahead and chop it out of circuit. Alright, now there's a couple different ways we could approach this. We could just hook up one of these capacitors right here. These are the coupling capacitors that were going from the first gain stage to the second gain stage, which we eliminated, and then this one will go from the second gain stage, which we eliminated, onto the third gain stage. So what we could do, we could clip this one out, or we could clip this one out. We don't need both. Or we could clip both of them out and experiment with a completely different value, which is what I think we may end up doing. However, just for experiment's sake, for the time being, probably we'll clip this one off and then attach it over here to the plate, and then we will just eliminate this one altogether. I'm probably going to end up going with a slightly smaller value than 0.02, and the reason is that's going to allow us to tighten up the bottom end just a little bit. We will move this capacitor just for the time being. This is probably not going to stay like this, at least not without some experimentation first. But what I want to do is take this and we'll hook it to that plate right there. Okay, let's see what kind of terrible noise we can make with this. We're using one gain stage of this 12AU7 into both gain stages on this 12AX and then out. So we do have a lot of noise, but no more motorboating. Yeah, you see how that's kind of not very tight. It's kind of just really brittle. Like, listen when I do like a palm mute. It's actually kind of splishy sounding, and I think some of that again could be down to the values of the coupling capacitors that we've chosen. It also could be due to the type of coupling capacitor, particularly on that first stage. So what we might do is go in with a slightly different value and a slightly different type of coupling capacitor than the one that you see here, which is a ceramic disc. Okay, I've rebiased this first stage with a 1K bias resistor and a 0.68 capacitor, which is kind of the standard Marshall value for a first gain stage. I've actually biased this a little bit differently than a Marshall would, so we'll see what this does. Oh, and also while I'm thinking about it, I'm going to go ahead and change this tube from a 12AU back to a 12AX7. Let's see. Lots of noise with this thing cranked, lots of noise. Loud as hell though. I think we're on the right track, but we still have some work to do here. It's not as tight as I would like, not as focused in the mid-range. Seems like there's just, I mean, it's very loud, very loud. The bass is just kind of flubby and not tight. So let's think about some ways we can tighten that up. Well, the more I look at the schematic, the more I'm finding things that are just anomalous to what you usually see in a guitar amplifier, which really isn't that surprising since it says Hi-Fi on the front of the thing. But right here, if we look at this output stage, this is not what you conventionally see in like a a pentode or tetrode sort of output stage. This is this looks to me closer to what you would see in a say a triode strapped output. That is, this would be behaving more like a triode than a pentode or a tetrode tube. We have the screen grid here attached to this side of the transformer and the B+ line, and this is the first B+, the same one that the plate is ultimately connected to through the transformer. So, and we're also separated here with a small value capacitor. So you can look at this a couple different ways. You can see here also that there's 270 volts on this screen grid where there's only about 250 volts on the plate. Weird thing. So what this is doing, it's allowing the signal to be coupled together here. The AC signal is coupled together, but the DC is blocked. So the DC has to, basically the high voltage has to go around through the transformer in the conventional way, but the AC is essentially strapped together, and so this thing is running more or less as a triode, but just in a weird way, in a way I haven't seen. And it's these weird amplifiers just seem to find me. But what we're going to do here, we also have, if we follow this down to the power section, we also have a node down here, right here, coming off the cathode of the rectifier. We have a node right here that is not being used by anything. In other words, we go through a dropping resistor before we get to the first node that's being used, or a reservoir node, I guess if you want to call it that. But that is here. So what we're going to do is we're going to eliminate this crap. We're going to get rid of that, and then we're going to come in here and tie the plate to this node and tie the screen, well, basically where it is. So we'll leave that alone, the screen, and we'll disconnect it from the transformer, and then tie this one down to here, like you see in a conventional guitar amplifier. Okay, so we've gotten rid of the triode connection. Now let's see what this thing will do hooked up as a typical beam power tube, running as a pentode. I have not rebiased it or anything, so I'm looking to probably having to rebias this. This thing is loud. This is the loudest single-ended 5-watt amp I think I've ever heard, even hooked up as a triode. Like I said, loud, just loud. Lots of output. See what I mean? Just flubby, really flubby. So at least we have fixed that output situation. Now let's refocus our attention back onto the interstage capacitors and so forth, and see if we can't tighten this thing up on the low end. First thing I want to do actually is just listen to the first stage in isolation. So what we're going to do is we're going to unhook this coupling capacitor right here. So we'll unhook it here. And we will tie something onto this lead and run it out to a different amplifier after we've run the signal through this first stage out to a different amplifier, so we can listen just to this first stage. Okay, this is going to look like a total mess, but essentially what I have is I have a signal coming from this guitar through the cable to the input, through this first stage, out of this first stage to this point. Then we're going through this capacitor substitution box and then out of that, and then going to this cable right here, which is going to my little KBA 15 amplifier back there. Okay, you'll have to kind of ignore the hum because we're getting a lot of it due to these exposed wires for one, and also because we have the rest of the amplifier on and going to not a dummy load but the speaker here, so we're getting a lot of noise through that speaker. But let's listen to what just this first stage is doing all by itself. Okay, that's the 022, so that's the original cap value coming off of that stage. Lower this a little bit. You can see a lot less bass there, a lot more of more clarity whenever you're doing a chugga chugga kind of stuff. You You see how it gets a little bit flubby there. We go up to 0.01. Okay. So I'm kind of liking at least the tonal quality. You know, there's some other aspects of it that I don't like, but I can ignore those because, you know, again, I've got a lot of noise going on and it's running to a solid state output section. So I'm liking some of the qualities of a 001 capacitor. So I think what we might do is tack a 001 into this amp and just check it through this amp. Okay, this amp is pretty much complete now, and the final changes I made were I moved this 10 microfarad capacitor for the preamp nodes over to this position just to make it a bit quieter. Added a fuse, which is a 1 amp fuse, and a 3-prong cord, grounded, which took care of a hell of a lot of the noise. Again, I rewired the output to pentode rather than triode, added a Zobel network on the output. I kept this 001 capacitor and added a 10K resistor in series. Have a 33 microfarad bypass capacitor on the output. Changed all of the coupling caps to poly style coupling caps. Once again, I got rid of one gain stage on the front, and changed the tube back to a 12AU7 rather than 12AX. That's pretty much about it. I think we're about ready to give this thing a listen. Okay, check this out. I've brought this thing back across the room. I was going to give it a demo, but I was noticing a bunch of noise across the room that I did not notice on the bench. So I bring it back across the room and I plug it directly into my lamp outlet, which is just going directly into the wall. And that's with the volume all the way up. Here's with the volume all the way down. Very quiet with the volume all the way down. You might be hearing some of the background noise of my air conditioner also. But hear all the line noise and everything coming in. And it kind of goes away when it's all the way up. Strange, but then check this out, okay? I'm going to unplug it from here. I'm going to plug it into my Variac instead. Okay, and the Variac should be acting kind of as another choke because it's a transformer coming in essentially. So that should clean up some line noise. And listen to this now. Listen to the difference. Way less noisy going through that Variac right there. So that tells me I have some work still to do on this power supply. Probably need to add some more filtering. Alright, well, what I ended up doing here is adding some more filtering. So I have 47 and 47 on the first two nodes. And that has helped a little bit. And also removing there's a second wiper on the volume pot, and there was a high pass filter, I think, going on there on the other wiper. So what I ended up doing is just removing that bit of circuitry because all of that stuff was basically acting like an antenna, and it's a lot better. Alright, well that does it for this little 1958 Silvertone Hi-Fi amplifier. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'd like to welcome all the new people. I've had a bunch of new subscribers over the past couple months. If you guys haven't already done so, take a look at my main channel. If you click on the Guitologist below, it'll take you to my channel page where you'll be able to see all of my past videos. They're kind of sorted into playlists for you already. So if you like this sort of thing, like the little kitschy, weird, you know, funky Silvertone stuff, there's a category for all of that stuff, and then there's a category for, you know, Fenders, and then Marshalls, and then whatever else that I've done in the past. So be sure to check that out. Thanks for watching, and for now, y'all take care.